Toby Williams, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat alone in his black Cadillac Escalade, tapping his thumb impatiently against the steering wheel. The air conditioner hummed softly, barely keeping the intense Kentucky heat at bay. Retired and wealthy from a lifetime in real estate, Toby was used to things always working in his favor. But today, he found himself stranded on the side of the road with a blown tire, far from the comforts of his grand home in the suburbs. The life he had built, filled with luxury and control, now felt empty in comparison to the road ahead. After several attempts to call for roadside assistance, Toby let out a deep sigh, resigning himself to the fact that he'd have to wait. The frustration began to build, but just as it started to bubble over, he noticed a figure walking toward him down the road. A young boy, maybe 13 or 14, wearing a worn-out jacket and scuffed boots, approached with a determined expression. His eyes were sharp, scanning the scene before landing on Toby. Without hesitation, he gave Toby a polite yet confident nod. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady and full of certainty. Yes, I do," Toby replied, feeling a strange mixture of relief and unease. The boy was just a kid, yet he was coming toward him, someone he would never have paid attention to otherwise. "I was hoping for a bit of help, but my phone's got no signal out here," Toby added, feeling a little more vulnerable now than he'd ever been in his life. The boy gave a small smile. "I can help with that," he said, kneeling beside the tire without hesitation. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer." Toby gestured toward the trunk, and the boy opened it without a second thought, pulling out the necessary tools. As Toby watched, he couldn't help but notice how confident the boy was. His movements were smooth and efficient, as if he'd done this countless times before, despite his young age. Standing there, Toby felt a strange sense of humility, something he hadn't felt in years. Here was a kid working without a care, without asking for anything in return, just out of the kindness in his heart. As the boy finished, wiping his hands on his jeans, he stepped back. "All done," the boy said simply, offering a small, satisfied smile. Toby reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills and holding them out to the boy. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." But the boy shook his head, raising his hand politely. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Stunned, Toby stood frozen, money still in his hand, watching the boy turn and walk away. There was something about the way he had acted, no expectation, no demand, just pure kindness, that left Toby momentarily speechless. As the boy's figure grew smaller in the rearview mirror, Toby couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted. The encounter had left him moved, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Alone in his car, he slipped the money back into his wallet and started driving. His thoughts kept drifting back to the boy. There was something dignified about him, something far beyond his age or circumstance. The boy didn't have the wealth or status Toby had built his life around, yet he exuded a kind of self-assurance that Toby had to admit was rare. That night, in the quiet of his lavish home, Toby couldn't stop thinking about the boy. As he sat in the leather armchair of his study, surrounded by shelves of books he rarely opened, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoed in the stillness. His dinner, a perfectly prepared steak and potatoes, sat untouched on the side table. He thought about all the people he had encountered in his life: business partners, employees, investors. Every interaction had been about exchanges, negotiations, deals, favors. But this boy, this stranger, had helped him for no reason other than kindness. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his whiskey, the memory of the boy's confident smile replaying in his mind. The worn boots, the faded jacket, the dirt on his hands. The boy carried himself with a kind of integrity, a quiet dignity that seemed so rare these days. The next morning, Toby couldn't resist the urge to find him. He didn't know why, but something felt unfinished. Maybe it was guilt, maybe gratitude, or maybe just curiosity. Whatever it was, it pushed him to drive down that same stretch of road, scanning the horizon for any sign of the boy. Hours passed. Toby stopped at gas stations, at diners, asking anyone if they had seen a boy who fit the description. Most shrugged or shook their heads. Finally, an older woman behind the counter at a small cafe spoke up. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan?" Toby repeated, making a mental note. "Thank you." Harlan was an hour away, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians. The drive was scenic, but Toby barely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. What kind of life did this boy have? What kind of family raised someone like that? When he arrived in Harlan, the streets were quiet, lined with modest homes and small businesses. He asked a few locals about Elijah, and eventually someone pointed him to a small house on the edge of town. The house was worn but tidy, with a front porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. Toby parked his car and hesitated, unsure of what he would even say. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. It opened a moment later, revealing a woman in her early 40s. She looked tired but kind, her eyes sharp and curious as she sized him up. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Toby Williams said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." The woman's expression softened instantly, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said warmly. "He's always helping folks." "I just wanted to thank him properly," Toby said, his voice filled with a sincerity he hadn't expected. "He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday." She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "He's out back. You're welcome to wait." Toby stepped inside, taking in the modest surroundings. The furniture was old but clean, and the walls were adorned with family photos and a few hand-drawn pictures that looked like they came from a much younger Elijah. It was a far cry from his own home, with its pristine surfaces and expensive artwork. But somehow, there was something about this space that felt warmer, more alive. He followed her out to the backyard, where Elijah was busy repairing a section of the fence. The boy looked up in surprise when he saw Toby standing there. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Toby smiled, feeling a strange nervousness creep in. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression easy and genuine. It wasn't a big deal, but to Toby it was, and he was determined to show it. Elijah leaned against the fence, his curious gaze fixed on Toby. For a moment neither of them spoke. The boy's calm demeanor made Toby feel slightly out of place, as though he were the one being judged. "I don't think you realize what a big deal it was," Toby said, finally breaking the silence. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Elijah tilted his head slightly, as if puzzled by the statement. "I don't see it like that," he replied, his voice clear. "If someone needs help, and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Toby was struck by the simplicity of the boy's logic. It was a concept so pure, so refreshing. He looked past Elijah to the yard. The fence was patched together with mismatched wood, the grass uneven and sparse. Behind the house, an old swing set leaned precariously, its chains rusted and broken. It was clear that Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Toby said, meaning it. "Your mother must be proud." Elijah grinned, glancing back toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Toby was quiet for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. He thought of his own childhood, spent in a house much like this one. His parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. Over the years, he had drifted away from those lessons, caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status. Now, standing in this yard, he felt a sudden, strange nostalgia and a deep regret. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Toby said at last, his voice softer than usual. Elijah straightened up, his expression cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything." It's not about need, Toby insisted. It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor. Before Elijah could respond, his mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Elijah, you better come inside and wash up before lunch, she called. Then her eyes shifted to Toby. Would you care to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome. Toby hesitated, unaccustomed to such an invitation, but the sincerity in her voice left him no room for excuses. I'd like that, he said, following her into the house. Inside, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. Toby took a seat, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit amidst the humble surroundings. Elijah washed his hands at the sink and joined them, his easy smile never faltering. As they ate, Matthew found himself drawn into their conversation. Elijah talked about his school, his friends, and his dreams of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about the community, speaking with a quiet pride about the people who looked out for one another. Toby listened intently, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. For all his wealth and success, his own home felt cold and empty compared to this modest house, filled with laughter and genuine connection. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Toby sat back, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. The conversation had stirred something in him, a reminder of who he used to be, before all the money, the deals, the endless pursuit of status. Elijah's simple, genuine kindness had made him question everything he thought he knew about what truly mattered. Toby turned to Elijah's mother. You've done a remarkable job raising him, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He's got more heart than most people I know. She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you. He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things. Toby nodded, his mind already turning over ideas. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't walk away without doing something for them. This family had given him a gift he hadn't even realized he needed. A reminder of what truly mattered. He left their home that afternoon with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. Driving back to his estate, he began to plan. This wasn't about charity. It was about honoring the boy's selflessness and the family's resilience. Elijah and his mother deserved more than patched fences and worn furniture. They deserved stability and recognition for the strength they showed every day. The next morning, Toby made calls, lots of them. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers. By midday, a plan was set in motion. Within a week, trucks and workers began arriving at Elijah's home. Toby stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing the renovations as Elijah and his mother watched in shock. You didn't have to do this, Elijah's mother said, her voice trembling as she watched the crew unload supplies. We've managed fine on our own. Toby turned to her, his expression earnest. You've done more than manage, you've thrived. But you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me give back. Elijah was quieter than usual, standing next to his mother with a thoughtful look on his face. Toby knelt slightly, meeting his eye. You taught me something, Elijah, he said. Helping people isn't about money. It's about showing up. And I want to show up for you. Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a transformation. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood, the roof repaired, and the rusty swing set out back was replaced with a new one. Inside, the walls were painted, the floors polished, and the kitchen upgraded with modern appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help with the renovations, carrying planks and sweeping debris, but Toby insisted he take a break. Your job, Toby said with a smile, is to enjoy being a kid for a little while. Still, Elijah couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the crew work, his eyes lighting up with curiosity as he observed them measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed his interest and invited him to help measure wood planks. Before long, Elijah was asking questions about tools and construction, his excitement infectious. Toby watched from a distance, a warm pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something meaningful, something beyond himself. The boy's energy reminded him of the ambition he once had before life became a blur of boardrooms and stock portfolios. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the project was nearing its end. The family stood on the porch, marveling at the transformation. Elijah's mother turned to Toby, her voice choked with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore," she said softly. "It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Toby shook his head, his tone soft. "You already have. You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about. Family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the renovation project felt like a celebration. Neighbors stopped by to see the changes, offering smiles and small gifts, fresh baked bread, jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant. Elijah's laughter echoed through the yard as he raced around, showing his friends the new swing set and the freshly painted rooms inside. The house, once tired and worn, now radiated life. Toby stood on the front porch, leaning against the sturdy new railing, watching the scene unfold. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years, simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others thrive. Elijah's mother walked over, a cup of iced tea in her hand. She offered it to him with a smile. "You've done more than fix a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope. And I think you found something for yourself, too." Toby nodded, taking a sip. "I have," he admitted. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered. Money, status, influence. But none of it feels like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun began to set, Elijah joined them on the porch, his energy still boundless. He looked at Toby, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Toby," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Toby placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his voice steady. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching the sky shift from gold to deep orange. The warmth of the day lingered, but there was a deeper warmth now, one that came from connection, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose. When it was time for Toby to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's wide grin and his mother's tearful smile were etched into Toby's memory as he drove away. This wasn't the end, Toby realized. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Elijah's newfound curiosity about construction blossomed into a passion. Toby arranged for him to spend time shadowing the workers who had helped renovate the house. Elijah soaked up every bit of knowledge, eager to learn. Toby, in turn, found himself drawn back to Harlan again and again. Each visit felt less like a trip and more like a return home. He no longer felt like an outsider in their lives. He was part of something bigger now, and for the first time in years, he was content. The story ended where it had begun, in a small town with a big heart, where one act of kindness from a young boy reminded an old man of life's greatest lesson. It's not about what you have, but what you give.